Hi, Dorie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Lauren, thanks for having me.
All right, start by telling us who you are and how you became a branding expert.
So, I am the author of four books. My latest one is called The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. I teach at Columbia Business School and give talks. And for the past, nearly 18 years, have had my own consulting business where I first had to solve for myself in order to keep my business solvent at the beginning, the question of what to do to stand out in a very crowded marketplace. And I realized as I progressed in building my business that that was essentially the question that almost everybody has to answer for themselves these days, whether you have your own business, whether you work inside a company. How can you make sure that your work and your ideas are recognized? And so I've worked to try to systematize that and help empower people to do that for themselves.
Absolutely. I think the question of like who are you and what do you do probably gives people more anxiety than anything else. And you would think it'd be easy to do, but to your point, it's like how do you make it concise and like something actionable, but also like represents you? And it's a lot to fold into like what seems like a simple question. Um, okay, so you have this term called brand equity. Can you explain what that means and like, can we talk about what brand equity looks like in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, if you hold equity in a company, you're an owner of that. But your brand equity is just really the value that builds up over time of having a powerful or respected or recognized in some way brand, so that people are seeking you out. The push in more and more of modern life is toward commoditization, right? I mean, it's so easy these days. If you need something done, oh well, let's just get somebody on Fiverr to do it, and we'll pay them minimum wage. Or
Yeah.
oh, let's get ChatGPT to do it, and they'll do it instantly, basically for free or for the $20 a month subscription. And so we have to give people reasons to want to do business with us. I mean, it's a losing game to be the cheapest option, obviously. So we have to figure out, what can we do? How can we show people our talents in such a way so that they would actually be eager to pay more for the ability to hire us or to work with us or do business with us?
Yeah, this makes me think of like back in the days when I was a recruiter, we would interview a couple of people for, a job. You would have a couple of people going for the same role. And sometimes there was something about a person where you were like, their brand equity seemed more valuable. And so it was like, what's the range or let's push for that. Or, there's that feeling of, to your point of like, how do you not be the cheapest option, but how do you really sell that value and let your brand equity be known? So I think everyone who's listening to this podcast, by the way, is like probably saying, yeah, I want that, but like this seems like how do we do it? So the good news about this episode is like I think you have some really good tactics about it. I want to start though before we get into like, kind of like the tactical part is how do you determine what reputation or your brand equity or personal brand that you have at work currently? Is there a way to kind of take a like a temperature test?
Yeah, so this is of course the important starting point, because everybody, has some kind of a reputation already. And presumably you have places you would like it to go. You'd like to be known for things, but in order to get there, you need to know what it is currently so that you can actually steer the ship appropriately. So how do you do it? I mean, there's a few ways, and actually this is something I talk about pretty extensively in my first book, Reinventing You. One relatively easy way to do it is, of course, to ask friends and colleagues, people that you really trust. I like a simple question. It's really, if you had to describe me in only three words, what would they be? And this is important because you want to narrow them down. Like if they give you 10 words, that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
You want to know, what is it that when people think of you quickly, instantly, what's the thing that stands out the most? And that's one of the hardest things for us to intuit about ourselves, because frankly, we just know too much. So we
Yeah.
want to get a sense of, what do people, when, first thing, top of mind, what do they think about us? So just asking friends and colleagues is valuable. Another thing that's useful is to do a kind of forensic reconstruction of your performance reviews. So, you can go back through and look at things that people have said about you over time and try to see what are the patterns, what are the trends that you're noticing. Another great one is to actually Google yourself and really try to be as dispassionate as possible and say, okay, if this was somebody else, if this was somebody else's name that we're inserting here, what would I ascertain about this person based on the publicly available information about them? That can be a useful question. So there's a lot of different techniques that you can use.
I really like the performance review tip. I have someone in my life where I would say not being the best communicator is part of the reputation. I do have a question because this person I'm talking about, they kind of had that reputation at work and they couldn't really get rid of it. And so part of the, I think, um, I guess one of the things that made them say maybe I'm ready for my next career move or thinking about moving on is like I can't leave this reputation. I can't seem to outgrow it no matter how much I try. And I could see that happening to other people at work. So can you change your reputation? Does that feel inauthentic? Or like to your point, if you've realized like, okay, my reputation was I wasn't detail oriented. I've worked really hard to fix that, but people still kind of have me pegged as this. What can you do?
Yeah, so this is a really crucial question, and this is kind of at the heart of what I addressed in the book Reinventing You, sort of the reinventing part of it, right? Because you have a brand that's nice, but oftentimes for many of us, we want to change our brand in some capacity, and it could be you want to change it because somehow you've gotten a bad reputation that you don't want, and you want to move forward. It also could be something even more innocuous, which is, what, I joined the company when I was 22. I'm now
Yeah.
38, but people still think of me as the kid. This is not helpful. And so, how do you make those changes in a strategic way? So I certainly don't think it's inauthentic. I mean, people do grow, people do change, and it's appropriate for you to want people to understand and recognize those changes that in many cases you've worked hard to make. So the first and most important thing to recognize is there's a term in psychology that I think is very apt here. It is known as being a cognitive miser. And this is very instructive. Basically, what it means is that, barring other, intervening circumstances, most humans like to conserve their cognitive resources. We like to, we're a cognitive miser. We don't like to expend our brain energy very much thinking about things unless it seems really, really important or really, really urgent. And so that is why, in a lot of cases, if you have been at a company for 15 years, people still think of you the way you were when you joined because they just, it's fine. It works. They haven't had a reason to really reconsider, oh gosh, how has she grown and matured as a leader? Are we using her talents to
Yeah.
the fullest of their capabilities? Like they're thinking about
They're
something
not
else.
doing
They're not
that.
they're not
Yeah.
thinking about you. So
Mhm.
we need to somehow find ways to move to the front of the line so that they can consider that and break out of that cognitive miser pattern. So essentially what it means, if you want to change your reputation, you can't just, be acting your new way and be like, oh, they'll notice eventually. No, they won't. You need to call attention to those new behaviors and you need to make it really visible and you need to make it obvious to everybody. So for instance, you could even call it out. You can say, hey, hey team, I know that I've, kind of had an issue in the past with being late to meetings. I want you to know I'm really committed here to changing that. And so, feel free to call me out if I don't do it, but this is my commitment moving forward. And then, when you actually act on it, they're like, oh, right. Yeah, she is on time now. Wow. But if you didn't say anything, they probably wouldn't notice and you wouldn't get the credit for it.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, it's important that you actually take the action and follow through with it. So if you are trying to make a change to your reputation, I would imagine that consistency is also a big part of this, right? Like you can't just show up to the meeting on time once. It's got to be something you consistently do. So these are also kind of, setting up systems in place for you for whatever that reputation change that you're making, right?
That's right. And this is often a circumstance where it pays to be overly performative, right? If you show up on time, mazel, but
Yeah.
it's even better if you show up 10 minutes early every time because then people are like, oh, she's really making an effort here. Like it stands out in people's minds.
Yeah, so calling it out, maybe in emails mentioning something like, here's the report. I've been working really hard on better PowerPoint presentation skills. Like, let me know what you think. Like stuff like that. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, ultimately it's just recognizing, sort of taking the other person's perspective and recognizing that we don't play that large of a role in other people's lives generally, assuming they're just a regular coworker at work. And so we need to be really thoughtful and deliberate because otherwise they are just literally not going to notice.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look, we have to call it what it is, which is like you're not top of mind for them. And to your point, if you've done a bunch of negative stuff in the past and you're trying to change it, you're probably gonna have to work a little harder in the beginning to get that through. Okay, so this has been really helpful for anyone who maybe knows something about themselves, like the example I used, what they want to change. But I want to talk about how do you actually let people know what your personal brand is, and then we'll talk about creating a personal brand strategy. So maybe you're new at work or yeah, you're new at work and you want people to think of you as this thing. Like how do you talk about your personal brand? Their communication tips, but I liked the whole like when you go to a meeting, remind them like I'm showing up early. Like what else can you do if you're trying to let people know what your brand is?
Yeah. So the first thing, of course, is to have clarity in your own mind about what it is that you're hoping to convey. That's sort of the necessary prerequisite. But assuming that you do, the part that I think often turns a lot of people off with personal branding is they make an erroneous assumption that you have to be like so explicit and so on the nose,
Yeah.
like if I was meeting with you, I'd be like, so Lauren, given that strategy matters so much to me, I think the strategic move here would be to blah, 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 blah. I was like, oh my God, like this
Yeah.
person, make it stop. So you don't need to be like that. But if you do in fact want to convey that you are interested in strategy, there are much subtler things that you could do. I mean, it could range an example from volunteering to serve on or lead a strategic planning committee. It could be when there's a conversation about, hey, what are you reading? Or have you read any good books lately? You could actually talk about a book related to strategy. And, hey, you're not hitting people over the head with it. You're talking about books you've read, but you are just choosing that one in a specific way. You can, sort of be thoughtful about things like that. You could make sure that, not in a obnoxious like drinking game kind of way where everybody's like, oh, okay, take a swig every time she uses the word strategy. But instead, you could just have in the back of your mind that it's useful periodically, when people are talking about things that are sort of near term, you could be the one to say, okay, these are all really important questions, but let's zoom out for a minute. Where do we want to be in 5 years, and how does this conversation relate to that? And if you do that at the right moment, that can often be really helpful and really illuminating for people because we do get a little bit too enmeshed. So it's just sort of keeping in the back burner, okay, here's what I want to convey, and being thoughtful about the ways that you do it.
Yeah. And I like it because I feel like if we're going in chronological order of the advice so far, it's kind of like find those three key words or phrases, themes, I guess, about yourself. And then how do you convey those if you agree with those? How do you convey those in your personal brand? You also have a tip about when it comes to creating a personal brand strategy, which I'll get into in a second, but you talk about sometimes starting with jealousy is a good point. So talk about that because it sounds very counterintuitive.
Yeah. So, we of course always think of jealousy as this terrible thing, this like seven deadly sin kind of thing. But I find that it can actually be a useful sort of trail of breadcrumbs in some ways because I often find colleagues or clients where they get a little stymied. You'll talk to them about long-term goals or things they're aspiring toward, and they're like, well, I just don't know, like I don't have any
Yeah.
idea, I don't really know where, like, okay, sure, I want more business or I want more good opportunities, but what does that look like? I have no idea. And then they kind of get frustrated and shut down. And of course, that's not terribly helpful because the more precise you can be about the goals, then the easier it is to figure out a path to those answers. It's really hard to obtain a thing if you don't even know what that thing is. So, all right. So, it gives us the question like, how do you know what you want? And oftentimes one of the clues is who are the people that you are jealous of? When you see, whether it's someone in your own life or you see somebody flashing by on Instagram or something like that, and you're like, oh my God, I would love a career like that. Or wow, she seems to really have it together. I'd love to know her secrets or whatever it is. That can be really illustrative because the people that you admire, I mean, it's not like you need to copy their playbook exactly or, do everything the way that they do it. But there's obviously something you're responding to that, oh, like, you can be, sort of the cafeteria Catholic here, right? Like you can pick the pieces that you like and say, well, I'd like to have her sense of work-life balance. I'd like to have, you know, I'd like to do Instagram the way he does. I would like to have the speaking career that she does, whatever it is, but it helps give you a template that you can use to kind of refine your own personal vision of what you want.
Yeah, that I think honestly what gets people stuck is sometimes this stuff feels too like not tangible enough, right? And so the nice thing about following jealousy is like it's a real person, it's like a real example. There's something you can hold on to that. And I think, would you say that a good exercise is maybe to examine, okay, who is this person and specifically what are you jealous about? And like almost like try to pinpoint more specifically what it is about that person you're sort of envious about.
Yeah, specificities is key here. I mean, I think where jealousy is bad or unhelpful is just, like having the feeling like I wish I had what they had, and then just like sitting there and stewing, or
Yeah.
being like, well, they don't deserve it, or something
Yeah.
like that. But if we're actually using it as a positive motivational tool to help us reflect and say, well, why is that appealing to me? Or, what would that look like if I took those steps or if I applied those principles in my own life? It can be an incredibly helpful reflective tool that really does bring you closer to where you want to be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've at least personally experienced that in my own life. Like one of the reasons why I started the podcast is I wanted more parts of my career where I was talking and having like an ongoing conversation versus I was always doing a one-way dialogue of writing blog posts or writing a book or that kind of thing. So no, I completely understand. So now that someone maybe has an idea of what they want their personal brand to be and kind of the how they want to craft this reputation. You actually say there's about three things you can do to actually become an expert in something and kind of develop their expertise and get really that recognition for it. Because obviously, as you said, people aren't just going to notice the stuff. You have to let them know. So, what's kind of the three steps that people need to do to become an expert?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time really trying to figure this out, right? Because once you establish your personal brand, that's a really important starting point. But there's a lot of people out there that, are known as being really hard workers or really creative thinkers or, whatever it is. And so like that's a good thing to be known as. But if you truly want to stand out, the question is, well, how do you become recognized as an expert at what you do? I feel like it's kind of the next phase in personal branding. And so that was the question that I actually tackled in my second book, which is called Stand Out, Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And what I discovered is that fundamentally, if you are going to be recognized for your expertise, there's three key components that you have to focus on. The first one is content creation. And the reason for that is that, this kind of makes sense when you say it this way. If you want to be known for your ideas, you need to share your ideas so that people will know what they are. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. There's not one right way, but it could be writing articles and blogs. It could be writing a book. It could be giving speeches. It could be hosting a podcast, a world of opportunities, but you need to somehow share your ideas so that people can see what you're about. Number two is social proof, which is what are the kind of quick and dirty markers of credibility that you have and are displaying so that people can recognize that you are a credible person. It could be that you're writing for high profile publications. It could be that you are affiliated with a university. It could be that you published a book. There could be you have clients that people respect or have heard of. There's lots of possibilities again, but you need some form of social proof so that people listen to you and take you seriously. And the third part is your network, because you need to be plugged into the cultural conversation. You need to have ambassadors helping to talk you up. You need to be part of the mix so that people can find you.
I actually really like, I feel like I've never thought about networking with those other two components, but actually, if you have those other two components, the content, the social proof, networking will be easier too, because then you'll reach
Yes.
out to people and it's almost like, oh, I kind of know what this person's about. And yes, we have enough in common that I would like to network and get to know them. Like now that I think about it, and I guess like for the people who are listening to this who have a corporate career, when I was a recruiter, with the corporate career, I guess the way this could have looked is I could have been sharing my expertise about recruiting or hiring. If I didn't want to be known for that, I could have been sharing my expertise on career development, or maybe I had this love for salary transparency. But to your point, I could be creating content about that, and then I could talk about how I've helped people with that. So I'm like, sometimes I think people get a little nervous that this is only for entrepreneurs, but truly it's for everybody. And I've never heard of networking kind of being supported by these two like cousins of it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is, in toto, that's what I call the recognized expert formula. And they do, it's sort of a flywheel that reinforces one another. And it's exactly right. If somebody has heard your name, let's
Yeah.
say you spoke at a conference or did a panel discussion or something like that, and then a friend says, "Oh, well, you need to meet Lauren." Obviously it's going to go down a lot easier if the person's like, "Oh yeah, I saw her speak at that
Yeah.
conference." She's not some random stranger. She's somebody that you've heard of. She's in your world. You're familiar with her. She seems like an interesting person to get to know. So all of these things really do reinforce one another.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I've heard a new term recently coming out called the corporate creator, where we are seeing, thanks to, the ease of like TikTok, Instagram Reels, where a lot more people who maybe thought this was for more creative careers are becoming these corporate creators. And that's really, really important. Okay, I want to shift gears just slightly because your newest book is called The Long Game. So talk about that, because I I mean, I love career development topics, but I also feel like people always want it in like short, succinct, like how do I get to the end? Like, so obviously your book is not about the short game, it's the long game. So talk about that a little bit and give us some good advice about why we should be patient and not be so crazy about needing everything tomorrow and on demand.
Well, part of why I wrote this book, honestly, is that I'm not the most patient person in the world. And so I will say, it's not like patience inherently is a virtue. It's not like, oh,
Yeah.
yay, all the best people are patient people. Like, if you can get amazing results quickly, then God bless. Yes,
Yeah.
do that. But
Yeah.
the problem, and what I've had to learn through hard fought experience over time, is that there are certain things, there's certain goals or aspirations, um, professionally and personally, that you might really want, that are genuinely important to you, and that simply cannot be obtained in the short term. And where we get in trouble is somehow trying to force that, right? I mean, it's like being the farmer and like looking at your seeds and being like, tick tock, tick tock, I planted these like 2 days ago. And it's like, actually, you can't make them grow faster. You have to be patient enough to let it come to fruition. And so, that's not to say it's a bad thing to try to hasten processes, but where we get into trouble is people trying so badly that they're making really unfortunate shortcuts. And so I'm a believer in strategic patience. Like, be impatient wherever it will help, but be as patient as you can on the big things, because most people won't be. And it means that you will have much less competition as you actually try to pursue a long-term valuable goal.
Yeah, I like your point about like the shortcuts. And it's like, okay, what's the anecdote to not taking a shortcut, or like hacks, right? Like you always hear this, and they're so good in an Instagram reel, like 5 hacks to, you know, I don't know, triple your salary. Do you ever feel, I mean, what's your thought on job hopping? I think like my mind immediately thought to like, well, there's an impatience related to careers, but there's also a lot of data out there that shows like job hopping can be sometimes the best thing for your career. So just curious your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of a both and, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the data does show, unfortunately, and again, we go back to human nature and how, a lot of people suck, especially compared to pets. But you know, like we do tend to take people for granted, including our really good employees. And so we don't give them as much money as they should get on the open market. They would get more, et cetera. That's unfortunate. And it is true that in certain circumstances, you can do better for yourself by job hopping. Like a lot of things, though, it's also true that a little bit is good and a lot can be really detrimental because, of course, unless you are in a super, truly weird market situation like we had like right after COVID, um, if you were a person who is changing jobs every 6 months or even,
Yeah,
every year as like, a grown up, like repeatedly, people are going to look at that and be like, what is going on there? Like,
yeah,
why can this person not stick around? And again, if you're in a desperate market situation, sure, you can get hired. But under normal market conditions, which is most of the time, people will begin to look at that. It's like, sure, you leave a job or even two jobs after a year. Okay, we get it. But if it becomes a chronic thing, the person very rightly will assume, oh, well, she's going to leave my company after a year too. Do I really want to take that chance? And it begins to kind of bounce back against you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel like on a resume between 2020 and I don't know, I hope it's not 2025, but I feel like those will be the exception to the rule whenever you're looking at years on a resume for something. Okay, last tip I just want you to leave us with before we wrap up is, if you could give one career development or career advancement tip to the people listening today, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, if we're only going for one,
Yeah.
what what I would say in terms of a career advancement tip is I want to actually focus in on something we touched on very briefly, which is the value of networking when it comes to building your expert reputation. There's a chapter in my book, The Long Game, which is specifically about networking. And one of the things that like if I ruled the world that I wish that I could encourage everybody to follow is I have a rule about networking which I call no asks for a year.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is that I think sometimes people get the wrong message about networking. Like the message is like, oh, like don't miss your chance. Like if you're in the elevator with Beyonce, don't screw it up. Make sure you ask her like, hey Beyonce, will you listen to my demo? Or like whatever.
yeah.
And or whatever the professional equivalent of that is. And so you get these situations where somebody meet somebody that genuinely they're excited to meet, they'd love to form a relationship with, but they screw it up because they pounce too soon, they ask for too much, and then the person is like, oh gosh, I don't want to
Yeah.
deal with this weird taker person. And so what I like to suggest instead is no asks for your. Now to be clear, what I mean is a politically sensitive ask, or a sort of an ask that requires capital. I don't mean like, Lauren, I love your top. Where did you get it? Like that. I'm sure you'd be willing to tell me. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, will you introduce me to your editor? Hey, will you connect me with your famous friend? Oh, hey, you're on the committee for that conference. Will you get me accepted? Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever it is, it's if you don't know the person well, it's probably too much and it's probably going to be the last thing you ever ask them because they're going to immediately say, oh, it's another one of those, because you
Uh-huh.
have to imagine they're getting that all over the place. And so I would much rather build, a slow, long-term relationship with someone that could be a valuable connection, and just literally for at least a year, don't even think about things that they can do for you. Just focus on getting to know them as a friend, build a reputation, get to know them as a person. And then over time, once you're past a year or even longer, things will happen, because when you genuinely are friends, number one, they're going to be aware in an ambient way of you and your skills and capabilities, and people want to help their friends. But, you know, over time, it becomes more natural and more normal. You're helping each other. But in
Yeah.
the beginning, it's very easy to scare people off permanently.
Yeah, I always say you can't withdraw from the bank of networking too quickly. You have to make these deposits. That it doesn't work otherwise. And I totally agree with you. It's like you can either have this slow build that then becomes a really reciprocal relationship, or you can have that ask one time, but then you're done. Like it's probably going to be done. And not to mention, it's part of your reputation now. Like, ooh, I don't want to introduce them to that person because I know that they ask for things too quickly. It's like a whole trickle down effect. But well, Dorie, this is a fantastic conversation. I love the idea of reputation management. I love personal branding. I think they're definitely connected, but I think reputation management it feels a little bit more tangible, especially in the workplace. Obviously, you've written a lot of books. So where can people find you, follow you, keep up with you, buy your books, all the things?
Thank you so much, Lauren. The best place for people to go to learn more and get access to more than 700 free articles that I've written for places like Harvard Business Review and Fast Company. It's all available on my website at dorieclark.com. And if you want to learn more specifically around reputation management, I have a free resource, the Reinventing You self-assessment, and folks can get it for free at dorieclark.com/reinvent.
Awesome. I'll put all of that in the show notes so you guys can just click for the free assessment there. Thank you, Dorie.
Thanks so much. Take care.